Okay, can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh, yeah.
thank you. And the estate gardeners just started, so hopefully you're not going to be hearing lawn mowing and it's just going to be me. But yeah. Okay, so first of all, I'm from South West London Law Centres, and we are a law centre based in South West London, covering Kingston, Croydon, Sutton, Merton, Wandsworth and Richmond. We've existed since the 70s, and it's kind of different law centres that have come together in South West London to form South West London Law Centres. So law centres were kind of set up in the 70s mainly to deal with housing issues, because that was the kind of biggest issue of the time. The beast has now changed, but housing is still a huge issue. So what I'm here to talk about is tips for gathering evidence for your housing case. I'm more talking about disrepair and then the kind of fire and building safety aspect of it. But I think for any kind of housing case, these tips will be really relevant. So first of all, the approach that I take is EIRC. I'm sorry that it's not a snazzier word. So if anyone has any ideas on how to have it as a snazzier word, then they are welcome. But EIRC is what I use. So EIRC, which is E for evidence, I for identify, R for report and C for connect. Basically, this is the approach that I use when helping communities use the law to kind of improve the rights of the communities. It always starts with evidence, so which is obviously what we're talking about today. So even if the situation is resolved at the first stage, and you report it to your landlord, they send someone round to fix the issue, which is fantastic, and it is always important to gather that evidence regardless. So I'll just quickly mention the other stages of identify, report, connect. So once you've done the evidence, you then identify. So you identify who is responsible for the issue, what is the issue, if there's a leak in the ceiling, who's responsible for dealing with that. So normally if you check your tenancy agreement, it will say that your landlord is responsible for dealing with it. So you kind of identify what the root cause is and who's responsible for dealing with it. Then you report. So you report to the person that is responsible for dealing with it. So that's at this stage. So you contact your landlord. So the second there's an issue, I would suggest you contact your landlord so you can get it logged with them. You then connect. So you can connect with your neighbours. You can find out if the same issue is affecting any of them. You might have a tenant resident association, which hopefully you do. You can connect with them and report it through them. And you can connect with your local ward councillors. So they're useful because they sometimes can help you escalate an issue. It's also really important that they know about what is actually affecting the people that they represent. And you can connect with your MP, who there might be kind of a bigger issue at play to do with your housing. And the MP may be able to represent your needs in the Houses of Parliament, which is what they're elected to do. So kind of EIRC is what is used, and then kind of each stage of the situation, you can restart the EIRC process. So say you've gone through evidence, identify, report, connect. It might be 3 days later and the leak still hasn't been resolved. So then you can start the kind of evidence, identify, report, connect process again. So today we're here to talk about evidence, and I will be going into details about that. So first of all, disrepair versus repairs. So quite a lot of people might kind of get the lines slightly confused around repairs and disrepair. And from researching for this, I couldn't actually find really clear guidelines on when a repair issue does become a disrepair issue. But as an example, last week I was talking to a tenant who had leaky taps, and she just really needed her leaky taps to be fixed. And that isn't necessarily a disrepair issue, it's a repair issue, and she needs to report that as a repair. However, if that if that leaky taps got so severe that it, say, like burst of a pipe, and then that caused like a leak in someone's ceiling below, then that and the landlord doesn't deal with it, then that becomes a disrepair issue. So other people, maybe you could post in chat if you want, if you have any other examples of kind of disrepair versus repairs. So then the importance of proof. So basically this is looking at how a tenant was able to use the evidence that they had gathered to fight their legal case, and without actually needing the help of legal advice services. She just recorded really good evidence, and we were able to, because she kept really good records. So Danny lives in a ground floor flat. The estate Danny lives in has a communal heating system. The system breaks a lot, which some of you might have experienced. So Danny wrote down every single time the heating system broke, so time of day, because there might be at certain points of the day, it might be more impactful than at other points of the day. She also wrote down the date. So obviously heating breaking in the winter is more impactful than the summer, say, but also the time and date is just like, it's good to keep an accurate log of what has happened. And she recorded how long for, so how long the issue had affected her property for, how it impacted her. So if you have members of your household who are vulnerable, or if you're vulnerable, or if it's caused you lots of stress, or there was someone else who basically their shower didn't work and they had an interview that day and they didn't feel comfortable to go to the interview because they were unable to have a shower. So kind of write down all of that stuff. So she reported it. She also logged who she reported it to and what was said when she reported it. So at the start of this process, she bought herself a diary and just wrote down everything basically. And because of the broken kind of communal heating system, Danny was given a plug-in heater by her local authority, and then this can cause your electric bills to rocket. So every time you top up your electric, then if you're using it to keep warm, then obviously you're using a lot more electric that month than you would be using another month when your communal heating was working. Because Danny kept really good records, she was able to demonstrate the difference between her electric bills when communal heating was working versus when it wasn't, and could actually claim that difference back. So that's really important to keep all of the receipts, so the kind of additional costs that you incur as a result of your disrepair. So the next one, so this is a list. What I was kind of finding quite tricky as well is what is like a reasonable amount of time to expect for a disrepair issue to be addressed. I would argue that 1 day is a reasonable amount of time, because obviously it has a massive impact on people to not be able to use their electric, to not be able to use their gas, and to have a leaky roof. So I mean, I would argue 1 day, but I found this list, which is qualifying repairs under the right to repair scheme for tenants. So tenants can access the right to repair scheme, and it is for tenants who, if the landlord has fewer than 100 properties, so maybe this would be relevant to if there's housing cooperative members that are here, your co-op might have under 100 properties, so maybe this would be relevant to that. Or if you're from a small housing association, and if it's your landlord's legally responsible for repairing it, and if the repair is under £250, which most of the repairs that are experienced under disrepair aren't going to be resolvable with under £250 because the issue is so huge. However, I think this guide is a really useful kind of benchmark to figure out what could be deemed reasonable for the amount of time to expect a repair issue to be affecting you. So for example, toilet not flushing, if there's only one toilet in the property, so 1 day. If your sink or bath is blocked, 3 days. You can see that the heating and hot water has different levels. So during winter months, if you haven't got heating and hot water, then 1 day is reasonable to expect a repair to be done within. If it's in the hotter months, then it's 3 days. So basically, after this point, if you've got the issue, you've reported the issue to your landlord, and then they haven't acted on it within this time frame, I would actually start the process of going through the complaint procedure, so your landlord's internal complaint procedure. And they should publish it. It should be public. It should be available to you. You should be able to ask for it. It might be in your tenant's handbook. And sometimes you can find them by just Googling your landlord's name and then saying complaint procedure. I found that in Croydon, they don't actually have a separate housing complaint procedure. It's all just kind of part of the one communal complaint procedure, which I don't think is right. I think you should have your own housing complaint procedure, and there should be an element of compensation details within that. So if you don't know, if it's taken you long to find your landlord's internal complaint procedure, or you don't know where to find it, then you should evidence that. You should make a note of that, because that can be part of your complaint, that you didn't know how to complain about this. And also when you escalate that to the housing ombudsman, that can also be part of the what you're raising. So then it kind of gets to how to record the level of disrepair. Take photos. So what makes a good photo is kind of showing where the issue is in relation to other things. Sorry, but it says click here to add text on the slide, so it might have distorted some of the text here. So yeah, show where the issue is. So again, I'll use the leak example. If there's a leak and it's over your baby's cot, then kind of put that in some context to show, because that kind of helps demonstrate how impacting the leak is. Obviously, a leak is always unacceptable, and it shouldn't be urgently dealt with just because it's over your baby's cot, but that might kind of help with the evidence process, especially if you choose to go onto social media or the media. So yeah, take photos, try and put some context into it, and sometimes you can date stamp the photos, so you can kind of show the progression of it and the date that the issue started, and try and get some good lighting. So if you've got a light that you're able to turn on in the room and open curtains and things, I think Danielle they have some great resources on Fix My Block, so she might touch on those. Take videos, so I'll show you right at the very end, just before Danielle starts speaking, someone who was able to give context of where the leak is affecting them, and was able to do kind of live commentary over the video. So organise a public meeting where you live to hear if it's affecting your other neighbours, and take statements from household members. So this is if you decide to do a group claim, so a claim as multiple tenants, then it's really useful to kind of come together, find out who it's affecting, how it's affecting them, and taking statements while the issue is actually still live. The thing we've kind of learned that when the issue is still occurring, that's kind of when you kind of get the most significant statements, and there might be a repair that is done to minimise the disrepair, but the disrepair might come back like a week later. So it's good to record statements and obviously date and time them. So evidence for a legal case. So I mentioned someone else who lives in Danny's block. So this is a leaseholder who is disputing bills for communal heating systems. And this person basically KED was able to represent themselves in court. And why I mention KED is they organised, because their hot water and heating kept going off, and they kind of realised it probably wasn't, if it was a communal system, it probably wasn't just affecting them. So they organised a big estate meeting, they designed leaflets, they leafleted their neighbours, and they called everyone to they had a TRA hall, so hopefully you might have a TRA hall, or you might be able to go to like a neighbouring estate's TRA hall or a community centre or a cafe or something to organise in. It is important to have a physical space to organise in, and when you're able. So when you're putting together a legal case, so things sometimes aren't able to be resolved through the landlord's internal complaint procedure that I mentioned earlier. So normally there's a stage 2 complaints, level 1, level 2 within the internal complaint process. And then it says that you, after those 2 levels, you can go to the housing ombudsman, and that shouldn't affect your legal case. So you can go to still continue going to the ombudsman and have a legal case running at the same time. So it's important to go to the housing ombudsman, I would argue, because it then goes on record how many people have made a complaint against your social landlord. So you can kind of show that it's a more systemic issue and then just what you're experiencing. And the housing ombudsman can pass certain, I don't know if you call them judgments, but they can urge your landlord to do certain things. So I would record everything. So every conversation you have regarding your disrepair, who you spoke to, where they were from, what time, date, and what was said. Record the actual disrepair, what happened, time, date, how it impacted you. So I would just stress that again, how it impacted you. And then the example of, did you not have hot water, which meant that you weren't able to shower. Maybe you have a health condition and that actually needs showering. So it actually really impacts you to not be able to have a shower when you haven't got heating and hot water. So, and sometimes, if not always, it is really important to get legal advice at some kind of level, even if you decide that you don't want to pursue representation with a legal representative. It is still good to get legal advice so you know what options are available to you. So you can do that through your Citizens Advice Bureau or your local law centre. I've put a link to www.lawcentres.org.uk is where you can find if you've got a local law centre. You might be entitled to legal aid. So legal aid is a payment from public funds that is allowed in cases of need to help pay for legal advice and proceedings. So there's a link there that explains if you're where you can check if you're eligible for legal aid. And so unfortunately, legal aid, well, fortunately in some situations, unfortunate in lots of other situations, because everybody should be able to access free legal advice and representation. But legal aid is restricted, and it has been more and more restricted. But it's you kind of have to be under a certain income threshold in order to financially be eligible for it, and it only covers certain issues. So with disrepair, it's if it poses a serious risk to your health. I don't know how that's measured. Again, I would argue that any disrepair poses a serious risk to health because it can be so mentally and physically impactful. But yeah, you can check the details of your case on gov.uk check-legal-aid to see if you are eligible for that. If you have a court hearing for an eviction, so this is an important one, you may be able to make a disrepair counterclaim for the disrepair. So lots of people, unfortunately, are backed into a corner where they say, if you don't do these repairs, then we will withhold our rent. And that puts people in quite a vulnerable housing situation, and it can be deemed that you make yourself intentionally homeless. But if this issue has affected you and you are taken to court for an eviction due to rent arrears, then it's really important that you bring all evidence of the disrepair situation to your court hearing, and that you bring rent arrears information, and on the day of your hearing you ask to speak to the duty solicitor. There are also no win, no fee solicitors. So some of these, however, take quite a high percentage of your win, especially claim farmers. So quite a lot of estates where there might be like a suspicion that there's a lot of disrepair in that estate, or the claim farmers just kind of know that it's a social housing estate, so leaflet it and say, come to us for no win, no fees. Yeah, however, a high percent might be taken. So you might want to check out Advice Local, and they list different community housing legal advice projects that might be able to help you at a better rate. Sorry, this is just am I okay for time, Becky? This is, I'm just kind of getting towards the end and just want to say a few extra stuff. So gather medical evidence. And so if you or anyone in your household, so obviously the disrepair issue doesn't just affect you, it affects anyone within your household. And so if anyone has a health condition, so it might be related to your housing directly. A lot of young children living in mould, unfortunately, develop asthma as a result of it. Or it might be that you have an unrelated health condition that is made worse by your housing, or that you're just experiencing this health condition within your housing. And obviously everyone deserves to have decent housing, but it's really good to put together all of your medical evidence, have that as part of your housing case. How has the disrepair affected your health? You could keep a diary. If it's caused you anxiety, stress, things like asthma, then keep alongside all of the other records that you have of the disrepair, keep how it's affecting your health. Have you tried to report the issue but you weren't able? So as I mentioned, that's really useful for the Housing Ombudsman. And has anyone come to your property to fix the issue? Document what happened. So you might want to take before and after pictures. So say you've got a disrepair issue, take a photo before the work person comes to deal with it, and then once they leave, take a photo afterwards. Again, if you can date stamp it, then that would be fantastic, just to show that it has been on the same day. And then if you kind of keep a record of each time the person comes to fix the issue. Unfortunately, we hear reports of where the person's come and it hasn't actually fixed the issue, and in some situations it's made the issue worse, or it might have damaged their property. Has anything in your property been damaged as a result of the disrepair? Take pictures, keep receipts of anything that was damaged or was fixed. For example, something that might have leaked on your laptop and it damaged it, keep that information. So other things that are useful for your case. So especially if you are going down the route of legal advice, or if you have a rent arrears eviction and you want to speak to the duty solicitor, a copy of your tenancy agreement, including the tenancy conditions, the tenancy file, so you can request this from your social landlord and ask for a kind of a copy of your housing file, basically. Any documents relating to notice of poor housing conditions given, including copies of any notes of meetings and oral discussions, and inspection reports or documents relating to works required to the property, and any computerized records. So some of these you'd need to request from your landlord. And then this is an example of how maybe you could keep a record of how the disrepair has affected you. Unfortunately, sometimes disrepair does affect more than one room, especially if it is things like mold. People unfortunately end up living the whole family in their living room because the mold has just taken over the whole house, and the living room has less mold than everywhere else. And so this is kind of this document might help you just keep a record of that, basically. And then if ever you're writing a letter, the section that says number, you can that can kind of help you keep a record of, like, so number 1, entrance hall, storage, number 2, toilet, number 3, bedroom 3, and they're the rooms that are affected. And then if you can see that it says, so when was the landlord made aware of the situation? So again, that's always really important. When were they made aware? How often was they made aware? Try and document all the times that they've been informed of it. How has it affected you? What was damaged? And was any extra cost incurred? So we can share a copy of this as well. And then this is to do with special damages form. So this is to do with a pre-action protocol, which I won't go into too much detail about. But again, this is just quite a useful template about knowing how to document things that were damaged. So item, date purchase, receipts and how it was damaged, and then that could contribute towards compensation. So Law is one tool. Again, Danielle would be able to go into more detail about this, but it is really important to gather evidence your disrepair, and it's not just useful for taking legal action, it can bring change. And you should escalate the complaints, so go through the internal complaint procedure and go to the Housing Ombudsman. You can speak to journalists or social media, which hopefully Danielle will be going into. Submit evidence to your MP. I think that's really important because, as I say, they are there to represent you and they need to know what's affecting people that elected them. You can submit evidence to committees. So some people that are on this call today attended Westminster with us last week because London Tenants Federation did a call out to say who would want to be part of this meeting, and we were able to have a roundtable discussion with members of the Levelling Up Housing and Communities Committee, and actually submitted oral evidence to them to show that disrepair is massively affecting tenants, and the Housing Ombudsman isn't at the moment being that effective. So this is just my last slide, and these are just some links that might be useful, and they kind of just give details of additional help that's available and talk you through the stages in more detail than what I have. So it's kind of, if you are looking for legal advice or if you're representing yourself, these are just quite helpful tools.